Welcome to Whitetail Rendezvous, hosted by Bruce Hutchin. I'm so happy you've joined us today, and you're going to find out a lot about whitetail hunting on the show. It is Whitetail Rendezvous, episode number 371. Hey, folks, we got a new sponsor. It's called Buckwild Coffee. What's so special about Buckwild Coffee? Well, a gazillion people go to Starbucks every day and drink coffee. Well, why shouldn't Buckwild Coffee offer you light, medium, or dark roast with free shipping? All you have to do is go to whitetailrendezvous.com, go to shop, and order your coffee, and I'll ship it out for free. Hey, thanks so much for visiting Buckwild Coffee. The best brew in the West, the best brew around the campfire, the best brew in the hunting shack, the best brew anywhere. Buckwild Coffee. Get yours today. It's a sincere pleasure to welcome Tony Bynum to Whitetail Rendezvous today. Tony has traveled throughout the world, and his photographs and cover photos are iconic. There's a long list of magazines that have had his photos as the cover. He also shoots for National Geographic. And at the same time of traveling the globe and being one of the best photographers in the business, he also takes time to be the vice president of POMA. What's POMA? Professional Outdoor Media Association, of which I'm a member, and he's also on the board of directors. Tony feels that you have to give back to your industry, and there's no better representation than Professional Outdoor Media Association. If you're outdoors and you're in media, TV, you're a writer, you should be a member. Tony, it's going to be a great show. Thank you for being the guest. It's never too early to think about food plots. Whitetail Rendezvous has an ebook for you. Just simply text 33444 food plot to get your copy. Welcome to another episode of Whitetail Rendezvous. We're heading up to East Glacier Park, Montana. Now, why would I be doing that? Well, a world-renowned photographer lives up there, and he was introduced to me by a good friend from the Professional Outdoor Media Association, Kevin Orthman. Tony Bynum, thank you so much for being a guest on Whitetail Rendezvous today.
You bet. I really appreciate the invitation. I do enjoy talking to colleagues in the outdoor field, and so having you reach out to me is a great opportunity.
And folks, Tony is involved in a lot of things. He's traveled the world, wildlife photography, conservation, the outdoor spaces are his canvas, and he just captures that. And we're going to dive deep into that, because one thing about the hunting world, one thing about being outdoors, is some unbelievable moments that you can capture, and you'll have that memory forever. And it's just not the grips and grins we do when we harvest an animal, but it's the places we get to travel in the sunsets and the sunrises and the storms. And sometimes it's chaotic, but that's where we love to live. And Tony's also been on the board for Professional Outdoor Media Association, i.e. POMA, for a number of years, and he's current vice president. So, Tony, your plate is full. Let's get into Tony and what you're doing this month.
Yeah, well, sure. And again, I appreciate you having me on. I just got home just minutes before we started this podcast. POMA had a great opportunity recently to spend some time down in Louisiana at Honey Break, which is a world-class duck hunting facility. And we, in conjunction with Honey Break and some other sponsors, spent 4 days there, brought in some of the world's best waterfowl and duck hunting photographers, and spent at least 3 full days photographing hunting dogs, hunting scenarios, anything and everything you can think of in the waterfowl space. And so I've just been busy, working on images. I have put some of those up at tonybynum.com. If anybody wants to take a look at those, they sure can. But what the important part of that is, it's part of being in this business. We're collaborating with other people in my business is super important. Building these relationships, working with other professional photographers and other media outlets, it's vital to building a business and a brand, and sort of staying relevant in the outdoor photography business.
And I just think of the changes that you've seen as a professional photographer, just in the equipment. And I'm amazed, on my simple iPhone, some of the high def pictures I can take with that. And people ask me, said, "Well, how do you do that?" I said, "I just took that picture with a phone." Let's talk about photography and the making of memories, and that's one of the central points of this whole show. We'd be talking for another 45 minutes, but incorporating from our deer stand, incorporating from the duck blind, wherever we are outdoors, utilizing photography to capture those images. And it's not necessarily, like I said, the grips and the grins, but it's a camaraderie, it's the sunsets, it's the whole environment that a photographer of your stature captures. So let's talk about how you began in this industry, and go from there.
Sure. So the beginning of what I would consider my professional career in photography really started in developing my craft. I mean, I tell people, and it's no lie, that I spent 5 years photographing anything and everything I possibly could before I ever showed anyone any images. I started out locally. I focused on things that I could capture where I live, which are rodeos, high school sports, outdoor wildlife, just anything I could do to build the craft. And I think it's important to remember that today, even with technology as good as it is, you still have to develop a craft. You have to understand what you're looking at. You have to sort of develop relationships with subject matter, and knowing more about subject matter helps you to create better images. Never mind the technology at this point, but just sort of understanding what it is you're photographing. And as my career moved on, I had made some major changes in my life, and so I decided to just take this photography thing on full time, and I've been doing that since I think about 2006, five, something like that. And since that time, I felt that building a portfolio of images that were as good as anything you've ever seen in an outdoor magazine was where I needed to be in order to sort of begin. Not where I wanted to go necessarily, but where I had to begin with. So, in other words, having a portfolio of, let's just say, 5,000 usable images, so that when an art director finally gives me an opportunity, I don't send them 3 or 4 great photographs and then they turn around and say, "Okay, we'll send the rest." And I'm sitting at my desk wondering where I'm going to get the rest of those photos. I was able to just go ahead and blast back with enough imagery that there's no doubt in their mind that I can produce. And from a business standpoint, that's really the key. You can take great photographs and you can be committed to your craft, but you also have to look at it like a business. And when people want to buy your imagery, you have to keep in mind that they're running a business as well. And so just being tight in your business, sort of focusing. And one of the elements to that is, and I think very important, is, and by the way, if anybody's interested in learning more about this, I do, on the top of my website, I do have a link. It's a free download of a 10-page document on kind of my keys to great wildlife photography. And what it really is when you take the subject and you put it in the context of its environment. So it's really when the subject meets that context that's most important to me. And as I developed into shooting other things, that naturally sort of plays out, and I keep that in my mind all the time. If it's a guy or a woman or an animal, I try and know as much as I can about that subject and its environment and its context, and then I try to marry the two together. And to me, one single image that can tell a story is more powerful than a snapshot. And in order to create that kind of imagery, you really need to focus on what you're taking a picture of. And so to me, that's really what it comes down to. And it's nothing to do with technology per se. In that context, it's more about focusing on what you're doing.
I heard a couple of things, and I always, when I took pictures, way back when I started photography, and I had a goal. Every single animal that I harvested, I wanted to get him alive and coming at me or passing by or whatever before I took the shot. And it was challenging because sometimes I get a great photo and you know what happened. The animal got away. I laugh now, but that was one of my goals. And I did it, and it taught me how to be stealthy enough and how to, I guess I'm going to borrow your words, take that animal, put him in his environment and capture him. Mm-hmm. Especially rutting bucks or a bugling elk and all the things that you've seen when they're all cranked up. And if you can capture that, it's a memory that stays with you forever. You have it in your brain, but all of a sudden you get that and you can share it with your friends and family, and they can sense right where you were before you took your shot and moved on. And that's what I think, when you say you compose the picture, and please correct me if I'm wrong, you compose the picture so you catch the species as naturally as you can, surrounded by his or her natural environment. And to catch that's going to be so creative. I just, it blows me away.
Well, I think you're right in describing the subject and its environment. I think for me as a hunter as well, and a lifelong hunter, I early on in my career sort of as it developed, part of the reason I went into wildlife photography was because the seasons were too short and I wasn't able to sort of be outside as much as I wanted to, because let's face it, opportunities are available, but they're only available a certain amount of time with a certain amount of budget. So in other words, you don't get to hunt all the time. And I felt like I wanted to hunt all the time. And as a result of that, I spent a great deal more time outdoors, which also helped me understand wildlife better. And people might wonder, well, what difference does it make whether you know what a mule deer does in February versus what they do in November? Or what difference does it make if a deer doesn't have antlers in March or May, and as opposed to October? Like, they're different creatures at different times in their life. And so for me, though, and as it turns out to be true now, the more you know about a species, the more likely you are to craft great images and it's sort of situational awareness. You know what their life cycles are, you know what they're doing, you know their habits, you know what they do when they get scared or when they're at ease. And so all of those things happen, and over the course of a year, the more knowledge you have, the better hunter you become and the better photographer you become. And for me, I have to sort of draw a line, which seems odd, but I do draw a line between my hunting career in what I like to think of as a career, my lifelong span of hunting, and my career as a photographer. And what I say by draw a line is, unfortunately, I'm not sophisticated enough, I think, in some ways, to have my mind trained well enough to hunt and shoot at the same time. So generally, when I'm photographing, it is a different mindset than when I'm hunting, because personally, my hunting is sort of my space and my time to be in a different mode. And so 9 times out of 10, I will have a small camera with me when I hunt, but it is to take a few snapshots of my animal and maybe myself. But I'm so focused on hunting that it almost plays a third or fourth role in the whole dynamics. And one more thing about that, particularly if you're in a region like Montana, western Montana, we have lots of grizzly bears here. And face it, spending a bunch of time photographing dead animals in grizzly bear country is a little bit risky. And so
high risk. I'm laughing because it's true.
It's more than true. I mean, it is a fact. And anymore, you get an elk on the ground or a mule deer buck in the mountains here, and you tend to want to get that animal out as soon as possible. And frankly, if you don't do that, you're actually setting up a real situation for danger when you come back to get the rest of your elk or deer and there's a grizzly bear camped on it.
And people talk about the dinner bell on Kodiak Island hunting Sitka deer, and fortunately Sitka deer are small, so in a very limited time you can be up and gone. But many people, they go with two people because when one's taking care of the deer, the other one's on guard because they just it's a dinner bell. I don't know if you've ever been up there, but that's the way it is.
It sure is. And, even with bow hunting, out here, whether you're in a tree stand or whether you're stalking or whether you're hunting in the river bottoms for white-tailed deer, anymore in the region where I live, the grizzly bears are available to sort of be in your lap all of the hunting season. And so whether you're hunting white-tailed deer, like I said, on the river bottoms, there's going to be grizzly bears around. And, when you combine, a dead animal and photography, you got to make it quick and get the job done in the interest of the habitat, in the interest of the animal that you've just harvested or killed, and in the interest of not creating another problem with a grizzly bear. And I think people maybe misunderstand it a little bit, or they haven't actually experienced it. But you're not just there to kill that animal. You have to be, I think, respectful of what else is going on around you. And so in doing that, I try and just be swift about it.
And well said. And times have changed significantly. And I know that people go up into the Bob Marshall and all that wilderness. The hunts have become a little more intriguing, exciting, and if you like adventure, then being around grizzly bears, where you're no more than a quarter mile from a living, breathing grizzly bear, gets your attention. That's my 2 cents on it.
Yeah, it sure does. And there's nothing like spending the night in grizzly country. It doesn't matter whether you spend one night or 10 years, you always have one open, and it's not really a scary thing as much as it's just situational awareness. And I do like to go to places where there aren't grizzly bears to go hunting, because I'm relaxed a lot more and I'm able to have a better time in some ways. But at the end of the day, being in an environment where you have predators that are at the top of the food chain, like grizzly bears, changes who you are, and it also changes how you look at what's considered wild and free range. And so, I would never change that for anything. I think we need grizzly bears around, and from a habitat and a wildlife standpoint, I'm just blessed that I get to live and recreate and exist where we have the full suite of wildlife that existed 500 years ago.
And think about that. And people talk about conservation, and there's a big debate about wolves and grizzly bears. But I can tell you, when I've been in places where they habitat, in parts of British Columbia and up north, it makes me appreciate where I'm at, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. And people call me, particularly as a matter of photography, and want to know, where they can photograph grizzly bears. And my reaction is always the same, and that is they are where you find them. And there's no sort of coming out here. Let's say you go to Glacier Park or Yellowstone or the Rocky Mountain Front or up into Canada. There's no sort of like switch on and off where you go, okay, we've just entered the zone for grizzly bears, so get ready, you might be able to photograph one. The switch is always on. If you're here, there are grizzly bears, so that's just the way you live your life. And so I don't try and tell people, well, go up X or Y drainage or canyon, and there's lots of grizzly bears up there, because as soon as I do that, somebody's going to run into one down the street or at my schoolyard even, which they do come to town occasionally, and run into a grizzly bear. So you set up a false sort of expectation there of, well, Tony said the grizzly bears are up in the Two Medicine Valley. Well, on your way there, you run into one because you're expecting them in Two Medicine, not in Many Glacier. You know what I mean? So I just tell people, just be aware. And that goes with every place where you hunt. Just be aware of your surroundings, and it makes for a more complete experience as well.
Yeah, I agreed. And this 2 cents on that. My wife and I lived in Bozeman for a few years, and I used to fly fish up to Gallatin, blah blah blah. And one day she wanted to go with me. I said, okay, but I'm taking my pistol and bear spray. And she says, why is that? And I said, so we got to the parking lot, and there's a little footbridge across the river, and there's a big sign, you are in grizzly country. And I said, that's why. She says, but there's a house right over there, and we're parked in cars, and there's all this, there's houses, it's normal life. I said, yeah, and the grizzlies live here, and you have to respect them. And that's the biggest thing that I learned early on. You have to respect where you're at, and know that you're not the top of the food chain in the wilderness.
Yeah, for sure. Aside from all the other things you have to do to maintain some safety and have a good time, but it is what it is. I love it. I wouldn't change it for anything.
So let's talk a little about whitetail hunting. I know whitetails have migrated and proliferated up all the drainages, significant number of drainages that flow into the Missouri River. So what is the status of whitetails in your neck of the woods?
Well, surprisingly, we have Montana itself has a really good population of whitetail deer. I mean, from down, you mentioned Bozeman, from around the Centennial Valley and down near Bozeman and clear over to, almost to Idaho in some cases and into Idaho. We've had a little blue tongue here and there. It went through the Missouri River Breaks area here a number of years ago, and so populations are coming back. But, Montana's not known for its whitetail. It's sort of like Colorado. Colorado's not known for its whitetail deer unless you sort of live there and know about them, because there are places here in Montana. Sweetgrass Hills area is a good place to find whitetail. Rocky Mountain Front here has some fantastic whitetail deer. And when I say fantastic, these deer get mature. If you want to talk about a Boone and Crockett score, just as a matter of trying to put some sort of framework around the size of deer, it isn't uncommon to find a 180-inch whitetail buck in Montana. So they exist. They're prolific in some areas, and I've seen them now where I like to mule deer hunt at 8,000 feet. I've seen mule deer between, say, 5,000 and 6,000 feet now. I've seen them in 8 feet of snow. So they're populating, they're moving deeper, they're utilizing more habitat. Whether you like that or you don't like it, I don't know, and I'm not judging that, but the fact is they're just sort of expanding their range, and I can't tell you why that is. They're just real smart critters, and they take advantage of the habitat that's available.
Yeah, I know Blue Tongue hit the Milk River, which I knew, held a lot of whitetails and still does. And that goes into Missouri, doesn't it? Or am I incorrect?
Yeah, actually, that's funny you say that. It's the Milk River starts here in Glacier Park and then travels north into Alberta, and then it travels east and then back in to the States and down into the Missouri River drainage. So it is an interesting river because it flows north and then it comes back and flows south. And it's a beautiful river. That stuff out in the central Montana has got lots of good river bottoms and very prolific for whitetail deer, and they are coming back. I've been told. I haven't hunted whitetail in that northeastern corner or even along the breaks for a number of years, but friends of mine that live out there said they're coming back well.
Whitetail Rendezvous is pleased to announce a partnership with GoHunt.com. Who's GoHunt.com? Well, if you're a DIY hunter, you need the information at GoHunt.com/insider. Why? Because it provides 4,200 profiles, every unit, every species, and every season. Furthermore, they give in-depth analysis, interactive maps, unit access, and seasonal trends. Draw odds are very important, and they give you the most accurate information in the business. All this is available when you go to GoHunt.com/insider. Make sure you use promo code WR when you join Insider. You'll get a $50 gift card for GoHunt.com Gear Shop. All in all, if you're hunting out west in 2018, GoHunt.com Insider is where you need to be to get all the research information. When you use promo code WR, Whitetail Rendezvous receives a small commission from GoHunt.com. So you guys sitting home in Wisconsin and Ohio, Illinois, Kansas, if you ever hunt out west, make some time for some whitetail sits or sessions, because there are big deer out there, and the nice thing about it for passionate whitetail hunters, people don't hunt them as hard as they do in the Midwest and other states. That was my take. Yeah, there was a couple of people that wrote some books and talked about hunting whitetails in Montana, but for the most part, it's an untapped market that do some research. I guess that's my 2 cents on that. Do some research. Let's talk about shifting it up in conservation photography and your lifestyle.
Mm-hmm. Sure, and it's one of my passionate subjects. Conservation is such a big part of what I do that as I sort of moved into photography, I felt like I always wanted to be involved in conservation efforts. And so as a part of my business, I'm often hired to photograph conservation efforts. And when I'm not out, say, photographing wild places and landscapes, endangered landscapes, I've created my own projects just to satisfy my urge to, show people who aren't here, who don't get to see some of the things that I see, what it looks like. And so, for example, one summer I spent about 3 months documenting and photographing the most wild places left in Montana, in the eastern portion of the state. I covered about 3 million acres, and in doing that was developing really a body of not just photography work, but of actually mapping these areas and identifying under some criteria what are the most remote wild places left in eastern Montana. And I don't know whether your listeners know this or not, but we still don't have a wildland or a wilderness style protected prairie region in our country. And one of the reasons that I was hired to do this project was to just go out and document and inventory some of those areas. Not that they're ever going to be wilderness, but the question was, as a resource, wilderness as a resource, wild lands as a resource itself, what's available, what's left. And that project was one of my most memorable projects, spending, weeks and weeks out in eastern Montana, night and day, photographing and recording the data, the road systems, if there were any, the plants, the boundaries. I mean, it was a fantastic way to spend a summer. And I still do that work. It's very important. Right now I'm working on a project for a conservation organization, a rather large one. I've been contracted to photograph some areas in Idaho, some areas here in Montana. And the idea behind photographing those areas is for them to use those images to tell the story about the beauty of these locations. And in particular, I was hired because of my hunting background, because I am a hunter and I use the resource and I have those connections. These folks felt that sending me as a photographer and a hunter into these areas with the perspective I have was important, because that's a whole audience of people who utilize those landscapes and who are often overlooked. Protecting wildlands tends to be something that people think of when they think of like the Wilderness Society itself or some environmental organization. And the truth is, hunters have been utilizing these lands for thousands of years. I mean, it's not as though people weren't hunting in these areas 1,000 years ago. And so hunting's not new. It's just our perspective has changed a little bit. So, again, I'll spend a good month this spring in the Salmon Chalice, and then down around Pocatello and some other areas of Idaho, just generating images of these areas, which will be used in conservation efforts to help tell the story about these places.
Let's talk about the grasslands, because I know in Colorado, Pointy National Grassland. So is a national grassland just under a wilderness area? Help me understand that.
It's a good question, and can be a little bit complicated because um, designating an area or a piece of landscape as either a grassland or a national wildlife area or a wilderness area, and who manage those areas all have very specific rules and regulations. And so you may have well, in fact, you have many national wildlife refuges which are huntable. People may or may not know that. Um, Wilderness areas are all huntable. You may not be able to drive into them, but they certainly allow hunting. And so, the difference between, say, a wilderness area and a national grasslands area and a national wildlife refuge is really about who manages it and what the purpose of the place really is. And so, under wilderness characteristics or under a wilderness scenario, it would have their own sort of set of rules and regulations. And so the goal, though, in my view, whether you call it a wilderness area or a national wildlife refuge, is to understand the habitat, understand the value of that habitat for wildlife species, and how that relates then to the human population. We need to utilize these areas. We need to put enough protection in them that some of these areas that are becoming more and more valued aren't destroyed. But I'm not in the camp of people who believe you ought to just sort of shut everything down and sort of leave it be. Because the fact of the matter is it's never been that way. I mean, as long as we've been here, we being humans, we've manipulated this environment. And so I'm not opposed at all to developing protected areas, but with use. That's where I'm at.
I was thinking, and Thoreau wrote about the balance, and when everything's in balance, there's harmony in the land, and that's why I love hearing wolves, howl. I mean, it's just an unbelievable voice that you hear, because that is wilderness. Or see a grizzly bear popping his teeth, 20 yards away. That's exciting, but it's wilderness. And not been to Africa, I've been up against it a couple of different times, and you think of that, the balance, and what I've heard you just say about the grasslands and the designation of our lands is the fact that there has to be a balance. It can't be what's the word, an island, a biosphere, and that, okay, we're just going to study this and see what happens. Well, sometimes that doesn't work out so well, and we both know a lot of situations where that hasn't worked out, because man has been here for thousands of years, and it is part of the land. That's my view of it. Your thoughts?
Yeah, there's no question about it. There are numerous stories of, you bring up Africa, where, in one case, I spent some time with a guy named Alan Savory, and some of your audience may know who that is. He's a resource manager from Africa. Wrote some tremendous books on systems of resource management. And one of the things that they did is they went into a particular area and manipulated the habitat and the animals to the point where they felt like, well, if we move the people out, then the animals will do better. Well, it turns out by moving the people out of the area, the animals actually did more damage to their habitat in the subsequent years. Actually did more damage to their species than had they allowed people to stay there. They didn't understand the relationship between the habitat, the people, and the animals in that area. And so a wholesale change, like take the people out, let the animals be, ended up doing more damage than what they had ever expected. So again, the relationship sort of between the humans and the animals, you can go too far. I mean, we know there's countless examples of where we've gone too far. The bison, the North American bison is an example. Pigeons are another example. I mean, there's numerous examples where we've gone too far. And we're smart enough to know at this point, hopefully, that, we are a pretty powerful being. We can sort of manipulate this environment and change things rather rapidly. And at the end of the day, who knows what's going to look like in 500 years, but I think doing our part right now to sort of help that along, to maintain the experiences and the opportunities and even the options that future generations have is super important. Being able to say to my children and others, other people's children, yeah, this is what it looked like, 100 years ago, and we still have these opportunities, and make those opportunities available. To me, is part of my duty as a conservationist, as a hunter, as an outdoorsman, and a photographer, is to share those relationships and try and help where I can to create imagery and stories that people can relate to. And like I said, I as much as I love commercial photography, as much as I love photographing, the neatest new hardware, guns, bow, apparel, whatever the case is, I really have a passion for the wildlands and for conservation.
While you were talking, I was thinking I was in the book list of Utah with some friends hunting, and I came upon some petroglyphs. And the Anastasies had been there thousands of years, but they were hunted just like I was. And I'll never forget that. And I can shut my eyes and see how many people have seen that. Not a whole heck of a lot because of where we were. And I'm thinking, we have been hunters. There's hunters and gatherers, but we've all been stewards of the land. And that's, I think, when I think about what we're talking about here today, folks, you got to be stewards of the land. What that means, you get involved in conservation. You try to reach common ground with those who look at it and say, well, everything should be wild and we shouldn't do anything to it and just let it go. Well, Tony and I talked about a couple of situations that hasn't worked so well. Your thoughts on that, Tony?
Yeah, I agree. Like I said earlier, I think the key is understanding that we're a part of this system, and having enough areas sort of in functioning properly, so that we can hunt. And let's face it, fish too. When the water's good, the fish are good. People are happy. You don't have to go far out of the Pacific Northwest. Washington, Oregon, Northern California, even parts of Idaho. Cultures have changed over time when they have been restricted or unable to harvest fish or wildlife. And now that we have better fish runs in the Columbia River, in the Snake River, we have better wildlife populations in those areas as well. People are more happy. They feel like they're at home. They can fish and hunt. And back in it wasn't very long ago, in the 80s and 90s, when the fish populations were horrible and some of the wildlife weren't doing as well, people were sort of desperate about it. And today, you just go to Lewiston, Idaho, and look at those people going up and down the Snake River and catching salmon and steelhead and hunting elk along the breaks of the Snake River. I mean, his tremendous social value and the economics are just now, I think, being better understood. Whereas before it was almost like, well, it's recreation, so these guys go out and hunt and fish, have at it. Well, what we're finding now, and the research is showing us, that there is a substantial segment of population that changes the economy of a place when you have healthy wildlife and healthy fish. And so again, I just don't see the downside to having good habitat, good wildlife populations, good environment. And at the end of all of that, we are sort of the crown jewel of the world in many ways because of that. Everybody, no matter where you go, wants to go to the United States and be able to go hunting because we can still do it. You can go and hunt high fence in New Zealand. You can go to Africa and hunt a preserve, or you can hunt wild areas in Africa still. You go to BC, Canada, up into Alaska, and those wild places are still the world over the crown jewel, and access and healthy habitat is the reason for that. I mean, people around the world look to the United States and say, man, you guys did it right. And, at the verge of changing the subject a little bit, that relates to how we manage our lands and the access that we have because we have public lands. And to me, I would hate to lose that. I'd really invite people to look into that a little bit more and just pay attention to what's going on with our public lands, and and try and understand that those opportunities do not exist for the most part in other parts of the world. You go to Europe, you can go to South America, and everything is got more borders and boundaries and rules and regulations than you can imagine. But when you come out to the American West, there's enough landscape. You can grab your gun, safety in mind, head out and hunt down an animal if that's what you choose to do, or build a fire and sit around and talk with your buddies.
Well said. We're at the time of the show, Tony, that you get a couple minutes for shout out, and then we're going to wrap it. And I can't wait till we talk the next time, because you're the type of guy I'd like to just sit around the campfire. We could talk all night.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I like to do. I do like sitting around campfires, and I'm writing a piece right now on campfires and photography for Western Hunter Magazine, and I've been on the masthead for Western Hunter Magazine since I don't know when, long time, many years. And so if you're interested in hunting the West, definitely seek that magazine out. It's called Western Hunter Magazine, and you can find me online. I'm on Instagram at Hunt Photos. I'm on Twitter at Tony Bynum. Facebook is Tony Bynum Photography. I like to think that I've sort of got my foot in all the social media spaces. Definitely check out my websites if you want more information about what I do, and I try to update my blog as occasionally as I can with the time frames that I have right now and how busy I am. I'm actually getting ready to go to Spain here in another week and a half and hunt ibex, and that'll be quite an adventure. And so each time that I go somewhere, I put stuff up on my website at tonybynum.com. Check it out if you want to, and shoot me a message if you have any questions. I'm always up for either pointing you in the right direction or giving you a really direct answer to your question.
Tony Bynum, thank you so much for being a guest on Whitetail Rendezvous. Hey, folks, we got a new sponsor. It's called Buckwild Coffee. What's so special about Buckwild Coffee? Well, a gazillion people go to Starbucks every day and drink coffee. Well, why shouldn't Buckwild Coffee offer you light, medium, or dark roast with free shipping? All you have to do is go to whitetailrendezvous.com, go to shop, and order your coffee, and I'll ship it out for free. Hey, thanks so much for visiting Buckwild Coffee. The best brew in the West, the best brew around the campfire, the best brew in the hunting shack, the best brew anywhere. Buckwild Coffee. Get yours today. On the next episode of Whitetail Rendezvous, we got a good friend from Whitetail Stalker, Willie Smith. Willie's going to talk about experiences that he had with his dad growing up and how he's sharing his love for hunting and passing it on to his family. Willie Smith, Whitetail Stalker, is up next.
Thanks for joining us. Be sure to tune in tomorrow for another episode of Whitetail Rendezvous, where you can listen and learn from the experts so you can be more successful on your next hunt. Until next time, listen, learn, and succeed.